Hello, Renegade marketers. It's Drew, your host, here to introduce a very special episode of Renegade Marketers Unite. I know you're thinking they're all special, but we're airing 3 conversations today with 3 CEOs about the CEO CMO relationship. These conversations were recorded during a Super Huddle, one of our biannual mega huddles, exclusively for our CMO Huddles community. The illuminating Q&As with CEOs David Friend of Wasabi, Rana Kaliouby of Affectiva, now Smart Eye, and Larry English of Centric Consulting served as guides for breakout discussions about navigating a CMO's relationship with their CEO. This is such a critical relationship. Now, we don't share those private behind closed doors discussions publicly, but I can tell you that the resulting insights were useful for CMOs no matter what their current relationship with their CEO looked like. If you'd like to be a part of conversations like these in the near future, please check out CMOHuddles.com. Now you're about to get 3 different perspectives and loads of astute advice on the CEO-CMO relationship from some seriously renegade CEOs. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you, huddlers. You all rock. Thank you for your ongoing commitment to sharing, caring, and daring each other to greatness. I'd love to focus on those 3 words for a second. Why bother sharing? I need not remind you how truly challenging your job is. You are the lucky ones to fill the only role in the C-suite that varies from organization to organization. And you're the only one who has to educate the rest of your C-suite colleagues as to what your function can do and not do. And then there's the fact that your tool set is changing at unprecedented speed with new tech, new channels, and new roles to manage that certainly didn't exist when you were coming up the ranks. We share to help each other keep pace, if not stay ahead of the curve. In a 2020 huddle, as we all realized we had to do virtual events, one CMO shared their analysis of the top platform, saving the other huddlers weeks of research. Just a couple weeks ago, we did a session on a bonus huddle on 6 cents because so many of you were looking at this platform. Caring. If any good came out of the pandemic, it is the rise of empathy as a critical leadership characteristic. The all business leader had to go into hiding, maybe permanently, as employees struggled with the threat of a deadly disease, an uncertain economy, and a depressing absence of face-to-face peer interactions. And even as we can almost touch a fully inoculated future, I got my shot, my first one last week, the importance of caring will not go away. You as CMO are only as good as the teams that work for you. And if they don't think you care about them, game over. You as CMO have the opportunity to care about the diversity of your teams, about the inclusiveness of your organizations. And you as CMO have the wherewithal to bring equity to your brand ecosystem. It's caring on steroids, and it makes a difference. And finally, daring, more specifically, daring each other to greatness. Why make that foundational to CMO huddles? Why not settle for some quality sharing and caring via a really strong peer-to-peer network? Because I believe, strike that, I know that CMOs can help their organizations find their purpose and then drive the organizational change required to make that purpose real. Greatness is a high bar, but as my multi-talented and frequent advisor, Benjamin Franklin, once said, we may make these times better if we bestir ourselves. Thanks, Ben. So today's Super Huddle is definitely about daring each other to greatness. And as you all know too well, greatness cannot happen without a strong working relationship with your CEO. A lot has been written about this relationship, including an article by fellow huddler Isabel Papulias, on why it is so often dysfunctional and what CMOs can do about it. And we'll share that after the Super Huddle. Think about your most successful engagement as a CMO. What was your relationship like with the CEO? Was there absolute trust? Did you speak the same language? When you took a chance on a strategy or an approach that was a bit out of the box, did your CEO have your back? Was there a shared understanding of what marketing could and couldn't do? A shared understanding of the impact of dollars invested in the short term and long term? Could you safely talk about brand building with your CEO? Obviously, it helps to pick the right CEO, and you're going to meet three amazing ones today. It helps to pick the right one to work for from the beginning, assuming you can go through the interview process and figure out a good match for you. Unfortunately, interviewing is a little bit like dating. Each party is showing their best and hiding their worst, and it isn't until after the honeymoon that the truth comes out. And if there's this possibility that you could get a new CEO at any minute. It seems to happen. My guess is that you'll welcome peer input on how they're enhancing their relationship, how they are getting alignment on organizational purpose, how they are collaborating on business strategy, and how they are securing the resources and capital needed to drive marketing success. I really want to get to our first guest, David Friend, who is the founder and CEO of Wasabi, the hot cloud storage company. David is a serial entrepreneur, co-founding 5 other companies, including Pilot Software, Synexus, Carbonite. So David, how are you? Welcome.
Yeah, great to be here.
It's so cool. I'm so glad you joined us. When you were on my podcast, I was really struck by how you think about marketing before you even start a company, and more specifically, your rule for describing companies in the simplest possible terms. Can you share that philosophy in the context of Carbonite? I mean, where did that idea come from? And just describe it as you did on the show.
Well, I'm big on simplicity, and I think I told you, Drew, when I was teaching at Sloan School at MIT, one of the exercises that I had the students go through was write a billboard. You know, a lot of people talk about the elevator pitch and so forth. Often you don't have time for an elevator pitch, and I like to give people the exercise of if you could make a billboard for your business and put it up on the Mass Pike. And people driving by have probably 5 or 10 seconds to figure out what the heck you're talking about. Can you do it? It's harder. It's harder, to be honest with you. It's harder than writing a business plan. It's harder than developing an elevator pitch. And so, you know, I always tell people, write the ad. You know, create an ad for your business, because if you can't explain that business to me on a billboard or a little ad that you write yourself, doesn't have to be beautiful, but it has to be succinct, then you're going to have a hard time explaining that business to investors, let alone customers.
I love it. And, you know, we talk about the purpose-driven story statement and doing it in 8 words or less. So what were the 8 words and inspiration for Carbonite?
Carbonite? Simple backup.
Simple backup. Okay, now let's talk about Wasabi. What was the simple concept for that?
Wasabi is cloud storage. So we're, if you look at our website, you'll see hot cloud storage. If you know what cloud storage is, there's hot storage and there's cold storage. We're hot storage. And the slightly longer version is same as Amazon S3, but 1/5 the price and 6 times faster.
And that's a value proposition that when I heard you say that, I just went, oh, that's pretty darn clear. What gave you the chutzpah to think that you could take on Amazon?
Well, Amazon's got 250 different cloud services, or maybe more than that by now. And you know, no matter how big you are, you can't be best at everything. And you know, you can go to Macy's if you want to buy track shoes or running shoes, but you can also go to the Nike store, which is what most people do, because there you'll find a wider variety of products, specifically what you're looking for, and you'll find knowledgeable salespeople and so forth. So, you know, there was a time when people thought department stores were going to take over the world, and you know, that sort of came and it crested, and you know, now the department stores are all going bust.
And so you saw this opportunity, you saw these big players. I mean, some people would be intimidated because it wasn't just Microsoft. I mean, Amazon, there was Microsoft and a lot of other big companies in it. So let's talk about, now you decided you were going to go into the cloud storage business, but what about this name? I mean, wasabi does not sound tech at all. What's going on there?
Hey, wasabi is hot.
But it is hot. But talk a little bit about the process that in your mindset, and I know you and Michael and I talked about this a lot, about why it was so important to you to have a name that was different.
You know, a company name or product names are probably the most important marketing decision you'll ever make. And Mike Welts, who I see here joining us on the call, Mike and I went through probably 200 different possible names for Wasabi during the first 3 or 4 months that we were working together. And, you know, we wanted some, and this was true of Carbonite as well, which I thought was another great brand and worked really well for us. You want a name that you can spell when you hear it. It drives me nuts when somebody says, "Oh, I work for X," and you can immediately envision 20 different ways that you could spell that word. Well, why make somebody have to go try to search and figure it out? I mean, it's just friction. You know, the other thing is you'd like a word that connotes something about your product. It doesn't have to describe the product, but it has to be, you know, it has to be aspirational. And so many people out there just pick these names that sound like some Latin something or other. You know, they end in A or something like that, and they're just blah names that are hard to remember. You know, you'd like to find something that when somebody hears it, it sort of sticks in their brain. And I don't know how you measure that, but I feel that when I see it, I can tell it, you know. And when we went through this list and came up with wasabi, Mike and I both stopped dead in our tracks. And you know, I think we knew that that was the name we had to have. Now we had to pay through the nose to buy that URL because it was owned by, you know, one of these web hosting guys in England actually had it, and you know, wanted a fortune for it, and we ended up paying a small fortune anyway. But you know, this is really one of the most important decisions that you'll ever make, and I believe wasabi's working really well for us. People hear it, you know, it's got some buzz, it's got some snap, it's hot. It describes to some extent the ethics of the company and you know, the product itself being fast and highly efficient. So, you know, it's really important. Carbonite was great too, because, you know, we had this image of Han Solo encased in carbonite, you know, and we were a backup company. It connoted sort of solid and, you know, indestructible, reliable, and all that kind of stuff. And when we entered that, talk about competing with big companies. When we entered the consumer backup market with Carbonite, we had EMC, HP, and Iron Mountain as entrenched competitors that really owned that market. And I remember going out to VCs trying to raise money for Carbonite, and they were like, "You're kidding, you're going to compete with who?" And we said, "Yeah, but you know, these guys are making it complicated. They have a pricing model that is complicated for people to figure out." In 4 years, we drove all three of those guys out of the consumer backup market. So I don't worry about Amazon. I don't worry about Google. And, you know, we're tripling in size every year right now. They don't care about us because we're, you know, Amazon's 46 billion or something in AWS revenue. And
Yeah.
they don't care what we do.
Well, as you were talking, I mean, I'm thinking about if you were a naming firm, you just rattled off intuitively a whole series of criteria for a great name, and you know, easy to spell, easy to remember, means something, but doesn't necessarily have to be descriptive of the space that you're in. I'm also imagining that wasabi just sounds fun, and it sets your brand up for likability, and that's good for employee and recruiting as well as it is for partners as well, right? It's an easy brand to sort of share.
Yeah, and that's why, you know, I like brands that are existing words, or you know, or built on existing words, because all of these made up names that you see out there are sometimes very hard to remember. They don't connote an image in your mind that visually, when you think of wasabi, you think of your Japanese meal or something like that. But there's just something about a word that actually means something that that helps remember it,
Sure.
and give it an identity.
So let's talk a little bit about your expectations for your CMO. Obviously, you've had a number of companies, and so you've worked with a lot of senior marketers. How has that changed at all or evolved in terms of your expectations for what the CMO can do today versus maybe when you started your first company?
Well, obviously, the role of the CMO, there's a lot in common, which is, you're still building a brand, and building a brand is something that a lot of techies like me overlook. I believe that building a brand is kind of like money in the bank, and that, people eventually, people eventually will pay up for a brand. But, I think the role of the CMO has changed from a technical perspective, because when I was starting my career, marketing was advertising in magazines and newspapers, and then it evolved to being sort of online advertising. And now, from a technical perspective, it's much, much different, because the vehicles uh, for getting your message out are much more complicated, much more diverse, social media and so forth. So, somebody like Mike Welts has to be on top of a lot of new developments in the evolution of marketing.
So last question for you before we go to our first breakout. So we have a sizable group of CMOs here. What's your one bit of advice to them in terms of sort of managing their CEOs?
Wow. Well, I think the most important thing is the understanding what you stand for in the eye of the consumer. Everybody's battling for attention in the marketplace, and no matter how big your marketing budget is, it's difficult to get your message out there. And so, most people, in my experience, are complicators. They're not simplifiers. And I think the key to great marketing is simple and simplicity. And a lot of the CEOs I know are complicators. They take what should be a simple message and they make it into this very complex kind of proposition. And I think the battle you've got with a CEO, in many cases, especially a CEO, excuse me, who comes out of an engineering background, is what appears simple to somebody like me who's got a graduate degree in engineering is totally incomprehensible to a lot of other people. And so the advice I have for marketing people is constantly simplify, 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 and try to get your CEO to buy into a simple message. And that's a challenge, but that I think is really the key to it's the key to marketing, and it's the key to the relationship you have between a CMO and a CEO, is focus in on that very short, succinct message about who you are, why you're here, why you exist, and why somebody should care what you're doing.
Amazing. David, I want to thank you so much for joining. What a great start to the Super Huddle. I'm so excited to introduce you to Rana Kaliouby, who is the CEO and co-founder of Affectiva, the emotion AI company. Rana is, as I learned from her fascinating book, which is called Girl Decoded, she was born in Egypt, raised in Kuwait, reveled in math and engineering despite the discouragement of her native culture, earned her doctorate at Cambridge by creating the first AI system that could recognize human emotion. Rana was then accepted into MIT's Media Lab, where she started a company that spun out into Affectiva. So hi, Rana, are you there?
I am.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me.
Oh,
Very excited to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad you joined us. I really enjoyed your book, and I mean, it's a warts and all approach. I mean, you talked about your marriage and your divorce and your family and personal things along the way, and it's been an incredible journey. I sort of think of you as a one-person United Nations, all the way through your experience, including becoming an American citizen. How do you think your diverse background helps you as a CEO?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think we're an AI company, and it is really key that as we develop and deploy these AI systems that we think about diversity, because that's how we build systems that are not biased. So I think of diversity not just in terms of gender or ethnicity or race, but diversity of backgrounds, right? You don't have to be a computer scientist. You don't have to be an engineer to play a critical role in how we think about these systems. So I'm going to turn my Slack off.
Yes, no worries.
Yeah, so I think the diversity of background becomes really key. We're a very international team. As you know, Gabby is Dutch American, I'm Egyptian American, and we have a lot of hyphenated people on our team.
Yeah, and I was going to use, you may be the most hyphenated person I've ever met. I didn't know if that was even politically correct to say, but if you start adding all of the things, it's amazing. And you know, one thing is interesting, and not to get lost into AI, but I have read so much about the fact that AI written by white programming males is very poor at recognizing ethnic individuals and distinctions. So I'm just curious, is that something that you think about?
Oh, absolutely. It is one of our, we often bake that actually into our bonus plan as an executive team. So we're in the business of using cameras to detect people's facial expressions and emotions and activities and behaviors. And if you train it, it uses deep learning. So if you train it with gobs and gobs of data that look like you, Drew, it's not going to work on people like me. So we have to, the diversity of the data becomes really key, and we each have our own blind spots. So the more perspectives we have around the table, the less biased the system is going to be.
Yeah, I think I know this much about AI, but what I do know is you need a lot of data, a ton of data. Okay, so as an engineer by training and then an entrepreneur, how did you sort of come to learn about marketing?
I would say it was an evolution. So I started, you know, I spun out of MIT, but my role was co-founder and chief technology officer. And it was only in 2016 when I kind of realized I was doing a lot of the job anyways and stepped into the CEO role. And that was about the same time that actually Gabby joined a couple of years before that, but I really teamed up with Gabby and we became thought partners. We recognized that we were creating a new category of technology, and you know that is super powerful for the company, but it's super powerful for the industry too. And I, you know, we both, I guess, shared this mission of where this could go, and a lot of core values. So we kind of banded up. She became my thought partner. Gabby, you are awesome. It's been a wonderful 7 years of collaboration. Hopefully lots more to come. But yeah, we kind of recognize that, you know, we have a unique megaphone here. The industry was evolving super fast. I think one of our superpowers as a team and as a company is we're able to translate really complex AI concepts into, you know, ideas that are accessible to the general public. And so we found that we're able to leverage that, again, to open doors for the company, but to move the industry in the right direction. We really do feel like we're stewards of this, of AI and of this category.
So I'm just going to put a punctuation part. You don't hear a lot of CEOs call their CMOs thought partners. So thank you for that, because I think there's a little jealousy in there. I also heard you, and in the book you described this, you're a little bit reluctant to take the CEO position. And you know, when you did, it was like, yeah, I can do this, but there was a reluctance to it. And I just wanted to thank you for expressing that reluctance. I think a lot of people will appreciate that. I know my daughter, for example, will appreciate reading that. But I want to get back to how you made it simple, because I remember we've had conversations with you and Gabby in that moment when you sort of hit on hashtag emotion AI.
Yeah, she and I we literally sequestered ourselves in like an offsite, and we wanted to create a talk track for what we were doing. And we essentially landed on defining a category. We called it emotion AI because it's a simplified, it's artificial emotional intelligence, but emotion AI almost fits in a hashtag, right? But we built a whole talk track around it. What is emotion AI? Why do you need emotion AI? What are the use cases and applications? What are the ethical and moral implications? And we mapped it all out. And I remember in the earlier days when we were having press interviews, we would literally have this talk track right in front of us and use that. And obviously over time, we internalized it, not just she and I, but as a company, right? It really became the company's talk track. And we built an ecosystem around us. This is one thing, again, I want to give credit to Gabby for that. She's really good around striking these strategic partnerships and alliances. So we started the Emotion AI Summit, which is an annual summit where we bring all our clients and partners, but also other thought leaders in the space, ethicists, sometimes our competitors. So it's not an Affectiva event. It's hosted by Affectiva, but it's more of an ecosystem, an industry event. And that's really key too.
Yeah, and we had Gabby on a live show on category creation last week, and went through a lot of the things that you did, which are sort of textbook category creation, and staying. You have to build a community, you have to bring everybody together, and you have to get recognized by analysts, and you sort of have to stick with it. And that's a tricky thing. I think if you're not a marketer, you could go, well, wait, we told that story. Why do we keep telling it? And we've had that conversation too. How has it been for you to sort of stay focused on that and as in such a simple message as you're trying to grow this company?
Yeah, there were many times where I tell Gabby, but we've already said this. And she's like, it's okay. We need to keep saying it. And eventually it lands, right? I think one key thing, especially in the AI space, trust is super key. And very early on, we kind of preempted the questions around trust and ethics and bias. For example, our company does not entertain any applications of the security and surveillance space. So we were very proactive about talking about that as a team and as a company. So again, I think being very intentional, building trust. I mean, obviously, Gabby and I have built a lot of trust together, but also trust with the community that we're part of. I think that's really key. Being authentic. I think Gabby realized very early on too that I could be a personal brand, which I didn't initially see, I guess, but I'm an ambassador for the category. And, again, I give Gabby a lot of credit for helping make that happen.
Yeah, and it is true. I want to ask you one last question. We asked David this, and you were with a bunch of CMOs. What advice do you have to them that would, that you could say that would make your job better if only your CMOs would do this kind of thing? What advice do you have for them?
Honestly, and it may be obvious, but first of all, I would say Gabby and I really care about each other. She knows my family, I know her family, and ultimately I want her to be successful. And I know she wants me to be successful and wants the company to be successful. So we have this we share a lot of things. We love traveling. We're global citizens of the world. We share the same core values. So I think this alignment is super key. But you can't assume it's always going to be there. I would say, again, Gabby and I invest and reinvest in our relationship to make sure that we stay in sync. And we will actually notice when we kind of start drifting, and we'll say, okay, let's put some quality time on the calendar and let's get back in sync. So that's really key. She's also my chief no officer. So she will often tell me, I don't think you should do this. It's not needle moving, or it's not the right thing to focus on. Often I will listen to her. Sometimes I will still do the thing I want to do, and she'll say, I know you're going to do it anyways, but I'm telling you, you shouldn't. So we have this like super open relationship. And that's been really key. She really is a thought partner.
What I really admire is the recognition that even though you are so close, is that you have to check in again. It's like a husband and wife. Yeah, I mean, you just can't take anything for granted. And it is a marriage of sorts. And so I really appreciate that. And in a good marriage, you can have a disagreement and move on. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you in advance for sending books to all the attendees. I know they will find your story as fascinating as I did. I don't know if you'll ever be able to talk your CEO into singing on the Super Bowl, nor should you necessarily, but we can ask Larry English, who is the CEO and Centric Consulting, a company that has been virtual for 20 plus years. Larry is also the author of Office Optional, and which is a timely book on how to build a strong company culture, even if you're not all in the office together. So Larry, welcome, and thanks for joining us in the Super Huddle.
Thank you for having me. My mom would not let me sing in church. I was such a bad singer, so we will not be doing that.
Okay, so we've got that one out of the way. All right, well, let me ask you this. You've been a virtual leader for a long time. I mean, that's sort of the basis of, and you talk about it in your book. What do you think was the hardest lesson that you learned that your fellow executives who were new to virtual may have missed?
Yeah. So you guys, I think everybody's been learning it this year, but so a couple of things stood out. We had a lot of people that were like, I can never work at home. There's no way I could ever do it. And they did it. And over time, they loved it because they found out the balance in their life. And we've known that secret for a very long time. But I would say from a leadership perspective, it's all about building, because you don't see everybody every day. You want to build those deep relationships, and you got to learn to do that virtually. So some of the things that I talked about in our breakout groups, like learning to be vulnerable, because vulnerability is a shortcut to trust. You have to have more frequent check-ins, and then we overlay personal and face-to-face meetings because that deepens relationships.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think as we go back to the hybrid, or as companies start to open up with and bring employees back, I think very few companies are saying everybody has to get back, but this hybrid model is going to create some new complications. So I'm curious, again, you talked about how often do you need to bring employees back in your virtual model, and what are some of the tips that you can provide in that?
Yeah, so everybody's a little bit different, and we call it gathering strategy. So how often do you get together, and what are the reasons for it? And I'll give you, so let's just talk at the team level. Let's say you have a team that has a lot of new members that join frequently, so they don't know each other. If there's a team that has a lot of conflict, we found that hiring right out of college, we needed to have those guys physically there because otherwise they're at home watching Netflix when they're supposed to be working. So those are a few examples. I would say for us, so we're in the US and India, and we get everybody in the company together in the whole United States 3 times a year. And I can't measure the ROI on it, but what it does for energizing and building relationships and building culture is invaluable.
Yeah, and I think it's really helpful to me to hear, and I'm imagining others too, because it's one thing if you're I'm just going to say a 40 plus CMO with a life. It's another thing if you're a 25-year-old and who is still sort of work is also social life, and so recognizing the differences in how employees might want to work remotely, I think is really important, and knowing that getting together at least 3 times a year is probably essential in this thing. Okay, so let's talk about your journey to understanding and appreciating what marketing can do.
Sure. I will be the exact opposite of Dave. So the slow learner on the value of marketing. And just to give you context, so we're a professional services organization. And before I started the company, I worked for a large international consulting firm. And there was no marketing. All it was like they would pay like a shady lobbyist to get some government work. And so when we started our company, we grew through relationship-based selling, zero marketing. And we grew the company really fast that way. And so people are like, well, you got to start marketing. And we were all like, no. I remember being at a leadership retreat and we all voted down spending any money on marketing 2 years in a row. But we started to feel pain. And I'll give you a few examples of that. So we were trying to be a $100 million company, and we were looking at our materials, and we had like PowerPoints with pink flashing text, and we're like, oh my gosh, this is awful. And then our own clients, when we interviewed them, they didn't know the services that we did, the other services that we did. And then finally, one of our partner, her husband took a job and he's a buyer. He got an email that day, the first day on the job, from a competitor. And we're like, okay, something's not right here. So we started small, and we started to build from there. We hired somebody who was very patient with us. And we talked about this in one of the breakouts, is patiently educating not only me, but the entire leadership team. And so over time, we've grown that. And as the world has become more digital and how buyers buy more digitally, especially after this pandemic, all of a sudden it has become, we're $150 million. It is the combination of sales and marketing is the cornerstone of how we'll grow over the next 10 years. So we've made, probably a $4 million, $5 million investment in CRM tools, training everybody on Sandler sales training, the integration of marketing. So I'm a firm believer now.
You are, and it was a journey for you, and I appreciate that. And I'm wondering, and it may be a ridiculous question or it may not, but do you manage your CMO different than you might some of your other direct reports?
I don't think so. So the measurement, what is cool about where marketing has gone is because it's become so much digital, and we're engineering background, everything is measurable now. And so we can see, amazing detail of sales leads and how they turn to work and the ROI. And I can see now a direct correlation to how much we spend and how much business we get. And so it's been transformative for all of us.
Interesting. Okay. So how do you sort of talk about your expectations now from a results standpoint? What do you expect on a return? I mean, talk a little bit about that.
Well, there's a couple of components. So there's just the day-to-day, where we're at today, which I'll talk about, which is, we've built this incredible engine. And I think by getting everybody speaking the same sales language, the same marketing language, and putting all the infrastructure in place, it is going to, let's say we were going to grow at 5 or 10%. I think we're going to be able to grow at 15+% when you add in the addition of that capability. The harder thing for me, and this is me being vulnerable, is we've grown our thought leadership because we're expert-based business. We don't know how to do that to the next level. And then we want to become a nationally recognized brand, and we don't know how to do that. So those are the next big things for us.
Okay. So and this came up a lot in the last two breakouts, is how do you make sure that you and Mike are on the same page?
Frequent touch points. I think there is a period of kicking around strategy, and there is strategy development has become much more agile because every business is being disrupted and everything is moving so fast. And so what we're trying to do is we've got a 5 to 7 year strategy at a macro level. And then you've got these key pillars over the next 3 years, which are big components, big rocks you have to put in place. And then there's yearly imperatives. And then we're changing those on a quarterly basis. So it is being in sync on all of those. And then having those frequent conversations about, hey, what's changed in the marketplace? We need to change our tactics or our strategy, and being in sync on that.
Well, as a consultant, I have to ask you sort of what big trends are you seeing right now that you think that you're advising your clients on? And I don't know, this is just a general thing. We haven't talked about it, but you are a consultant and you pay attention to what's going on in the world. What's one big thing that you think is going to change, or that companies need to be thinking about in the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, so we're not going back to the way things were. And so, we've talked about I think most companies are going to be forced to adopt a hybrid model because their employees are going to quit. They're going to go work for somebody that allows it. But if you talk about the bigger trends of a variable workforce, many more gigs and gig workers and freelancers, and you have to learn how to incorporate them into your business and make it your business sticky so they want to continue to work with you. And then if you talk broader, we can see the data because customers had to adopt digital channels during the pandemic. They're not going back. They're like, we love this. So an example is I'm on the board of a hospital and we couldn't get docs to use telehealth ever. And patients didn't want to use it. And they started using it during the pandemic and they're like, whoa, this is awesome. And so that is massive. And the other thing that's really interesting that's not obvious is because everybody now has installed all these tools to work together remotely, you are gathering massive amounts of data. And so you have a digital x-ray of how your company's operating. And it's a little scary. There's a creepy factor to it, but you can see where all the information flows, who your most valuable people in your organization are. You can actually use natural language processing. You can see if people are being included or not. That is going to be a massive trend in the next few years. And the other thing is it's flattening organization structure because everybody has access to all this information now.
Yeah, there's some companies that are actually in that business of just analyzing, the communications and so forth. You've now sat in on 2 breakouts. You've listened to a number of CMOs talk about it. What advice do you have going the other way to these CMOs?
Yeah, I already said it. And so sorry for those that were in the breakouts. For me, I'm still not a smart marketing guy. And so I need patient continuous education with me to get up to speed of what's possible. So I really understand it. So I can build it into the strategy. And then, this is me personally, but I need a deep personal relationship where we can go toe to toe and say anything to each other. Because that's really critical and being, hand in hand and getting the company where it needs to be.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, by the way. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being part of these sessions. It's great to have you with us. All right. Well, if you've enjoyed this episode, I would encourage you to write a review, share it with a friend, give us a 5-star rating, any other things, or send me a note and just say, hey, Drew, love the episode. We really appreciate your feedback. I'm your host, Drew Neiser, and until next time, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.